Climate change is worrying in a way that the needs are getting different.
Конечно, очень хочется, чтобы жизнь вернулась в поселок.
Covid-19 pandemisi özellikle dezavantajlı grup olarak adettiğimiz Suriyeli mültecileri de çok derinden sarstı.
Our support is still needed.
Climate change is worrying in a way that the needs are getting different.
Конечно, очень хочется, чтобы жизнь вернулась в поселок.
Covid-19 pandemisi özellikle dezavantajlı grup olarak adettiğimiz Suriyeli mültecileri de çok derinden sarstı.
Our support is still needed.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to this session this afternoon, where we will be discussing the in-country common logistical services. My name is Susan Hodgson. I am the Global Humanitarian Supply Chain Lead for Save the Children International, and today we have 4 members on the panel, which in a moment I'll ask them to introduce themselves. As the point for the discussion today, we'll be looking and discussing what are the efficiency and effectiveness gains from common logistical services, what can they provide to a country for last mile distribution, and how can the European humanitarian response capacity play a role in that requirement. So if we start first, and I'll ask you, Jean, to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hello all, I'm Jérôme Rigard, Atlas Logistic Handicap International Deployment Manager.
Thank you. And on Zoom we have Danny and Cecile. If Danny, would you do an introduction, please? You're there?
Everybody, I'm Danny. I'm the Atlas Logistic Executive Director. Thanks.
And Cecile?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for having me. I am Cecile Terra, the Global Supply Chain Director for Plan International.
Thank you, Cecile. And Richard?
Hi there. My name is Richard Neller. I'm from DG ECHO, and I work on a team that is supporting a more comprehensive and strategic approach to logistics in many different ways. We've been heavily involved with the humanitarian air bridge and also now working on the European humanitarian response capacity. We've worked on the logistics policy as well, which was launched on the 7th of February. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Richard. And so we have a number of presentations this afternoon. Before we go into some questions to the panel, and then we have hopefully some questions from the audience, both here in the auditorium and online. So we'll start the first of the presentations, which is from Danny. Danny, are you online?
Yep, thanks a lot. Sue, can we please launch presentations then?
Pardon?
Can we launch a presentation and the slides, please?
Yes, yeah, there we go.
Great, thanks. So I'm Danny, I'm the head of Atlas Logistics. Some of you may know Atlas. It's an operation unit of Handicap International Humanitarian Inclusion, and we specialize in the delivery of aid in support of a humanitarian organization our business is about delivering common transport and storage services in sensitive context, and this is what we are going to talk a little bit today in the following slides. We do then common transport and storage platform, civil engineering, road rehabilitation in order to facilitate access to the supply of aid. And we are specialized also in logistic analysis and capacity building. Next slide, please. So in line with the release of this logistics policy from ECO, I'm going to try to push this idea about how we can look at logistics differently, and especially how can logistics become a driver of the impact of aid. So we're going to build on a few examples from the Atlas Logistics experience to try to document this a little bit further. Next slide, please. And again. So we've been discussing quite a lot lately about how logistics can boost aid efficiency. It's an idea that we've been pushing also for quite a while in Atlas Logistics, and in order to provide evidence about that, we've done a survey with WHU University, which aimed at quantifying the cost and time saving of common service provision. One interesting result that came out of that is the fact that when we implement a common services approach, we save roughly a minimum of 22% of direct transport cost saving. It is a survey that we made in CAR, so we've tested, we've got this result based on the CAR context, but we've also made again this survey in DRC, and we roughly have the same evidence that came out. So 22% direct transport cost saving. And next slide, please. We also try to quantify the time that we save in order to deliver aid through a common services platform, and roughly we have between 6 to 28% time saving, depending on what we look at, and especially if we consider the time that as a common service provider, the time that we save in order to process requests and mobilize the transport market, we get to up to 28% time saving when it is done through a common service provider as compared to if it is done through an individual organization. So those figures give an idea about then the benefit of common services approach. So of course, efficiency is a very strong argument to go to push for this common service idea. But what I would like to emphasize today is the fact that I strongly believe that we should go even beyond that. And it's something that I've experienced through the few years that I've been with Atlas Logistics. I strongly believe today that beyond efficiency, a common service approach can also have a much wider impact on humanitarian aid. Next slide, please. One of the key elements of that is the issue of access. Common service approach can have a very strong impact in terms of opening access to hard to reach communities. As you all know, the humanitarian space now is shrinking because it's becoming increasingly difficult to work in tense environments, sensitive environments with security, jihadist issues, and so on and so forth. And through logistic platforms, through a common service approach, it can help to tackle that. So we have here an example of Haiti, where we've opened a logistic transport and storage platform since 2019. And one of the issues that we decided to open actually this platform with the fact that the security situation was worsening in Haiti, with a strong increase of attacks and robberies and even killings in the islands on road, and especially on road transportation. And what we've developed here is a maritime platform with this idea of delivering aid through sea in order to avoid the issues that we have by road transportation. And we've combined that with logistic analysis capacity. It is a map that you have on the top above. Where with this capacity, we've also found out that the hardest to reach communities, among the hardest to reach are the communities which are located in the coastal area, and for which having a maritime platform is a way to a very smart way to provide aid to those hard to reach communities. We've also seen the benefit of having this logistics platform in the earthquake last year, in August last year, where you see in the map below, you can see the two red spots, which are like hot spots, where we know that there are, where are frequently robberies and attacks. And through the maritime platform, we were able then to deliver aid, getting around those hotspots of, the tense spot, which prevents the aid to get to communities which were affected by the earthquake. Next slide, please. Another illustration of how common services can have an impact on access is a programming that we have developed in Mali, which is funded, by the way, by ECO and CDCS. Here, what we've developed is a multimodal transport and storage platform with road transport and river transport, which help us actually to kind of choose one way or another, depending on the context, depending on the price issue, but also the security issues that we find out, and which makes that we can optimize the way we deliver aid to hard to reach areas. And we've combined that also with a strong capacity building activities. We train transporters on humanitarian principles. We train transporters on access negotiation. And we also add a very strong security analysis and support to transporters, which makes that they are more likely, they trust Atlas Logistics, they trust HI, they are more likely to go to very sensitive areas because they know they have the backup of Atlas Logistics behind, and that they are more trustful to get to this hard to reach area. Next slide, please. So we have the same sort of setup in CAR, where we combine river transportation and road transportation. And here also we included a road rehabilitation capacity, which help us actually to rehabilitate roads to provide alternative to the main channel of aid. The primary axis that we use to deliver aid, and which in certain occasion when the security is getting, the violence are getting higher on those roads, which we can then use secondary axis through the civil engineering capacity to deliver aid to hard to reach area. So here again, we combine civil engineering capacity with a multimodal platform, with capacity building of transporters to open humanitarian space as much as, to contribute to the fact that we open humanitarian space as much as we can. So through those examples, what I'm trying to push here is the fact that through a dedicated expertise, through the fact that we have a capacity as a common service provider to look at things at a national level, at a systemic level, and with the capacities that we have to mobilize different kind of expertise, we contribute to open humanitarian space. And when we do that, in the end, what we're talking about here is about having a life-saving impact in terms of humanitarian aid. So again, efficiency, yes, but we can do much more by mobilized common services approach. Next slide, please. Then I gave a few other examples of what we can achieve in terms of impact through common logistic services. One is about the fact that when we have common services in place in a country when there is a crisis peak, when there is a sudden demand on supplies. The fact that we have a platform ready makes that we can put the resources of the platform as a very strong knowledge of the transport market that we have to the service of all humanitarian actors. Then we optimize, of course, aid, but we also have an impact in terms of reduction of inflation on market. Next slide, please. Another, I think, very interesting impact that we can have through common service approach is, we're talking a lot about Nexus approach these days. And here is a concrete example of what we can achieve when we mobilize the transport market through a logistic platform. We contribute to the professionalization of this transport market. By the single fact that we are mobilizing transporters in our logistic platform, we are raising the standards in terms of transparency, in terms of quality, in terms of respect of the legal framework. And in the end, we are taking out transporter from the informal sector to get to a more formal way of operating transports. And on top of that, we are also delivering capacity building activities, capacity training to transporters to strengthen their operating model, to transport their business model, which result in the end in having a boost in terms of economic development of the local markets. Next slide, please. Another interesting benefit of common services is support that we provide on coordination, especially in terms of logistics and access through the knowledge that we have in terms of at system and national level of the logistic gaps and issues. And as an example, we are also co-facilitating the logistic cluster in some countries such as CR. And then we can make the expertise that we have on grassroots, the grassroots expertise that we have, we can make it available for the benefit of then the full coordination system. And maybe last thing, next slide, please. Last thing that I would like to point out is the fact that, next slide, please. The fact that through common services approach, we can also have a very strong impact in terms of greening aid. One of the issues that we have in terms of transport is that in most southern countries, the transporters, they remove their anti-pollution system in their vehicles because it's consuming more fuel. And, by mobilize them, we offer, through logistic platform, we offer them a market, which is a strong lever also for behavior change, for pushing transporters to be aware and to modify their system in order to limit carbon emission of transport. And there is also this idea of saying, like, through multimodal capacity that we can have in common services, we can choose which are the one which are the less polluting. So that were the examples that I wanted to push. We are almost at the end. Next slide, please. What we're trying to push here is this idea of there is a lot of room to shift to a smarter use of logistics. And through common service approach, through programmatic approach of logistics, we can achieve that. And mostly we can, there is this idea of saying we need to move from this support approach of logistics. We need to move from a reactive approach of logistics, which is where we activate our expertise depending on the gaps that we identify. We can move from this to a more proactive approach of logistics, which in the end is going to have a direct impact at the whole system level, at the whole level of the humanitarian response. So I hope you will have found these examples interesting, and I really hope that we'll be able to join forces with ECO, with all expert logistic organization, and with you all to go for this new approach of logistics and to push this further. Thank you very much, and back to you, Susan.
Thanks, Danny. I know that we do have some questions for you, but we're going to wait until after the presentations to start asking the questions. So we are going to move on to a second presentation from Cécile.
Hi, Suzanne. Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me well. I'm sorry I cannot be there in person. I heard the place where you are is absolutely beautiful, but unfortunately, I will be online. So the question that was asked for this forum is what are the efficiency, effectiveness gain of common in-country logistics? So I wanted to discuss a little bit about that, and I started with a bit of a provocative slide. How can we close and start closing the funding gap? Why not starting in logistics? And I am referring to a document that was published in 2016, too important to fail, addressing the humanitarian financing gap. And in there, it was a lot of options, like common requirement, joint assessment, simplify reporting. But there is another one as well that we don't talk very often, which is logistics. And you can move to the next slide. So if you think just about what I call the logistic market, here you have an example of the 30 players. It's not exhaustive, but it's the top 30 players that we have taken to do this analysis. So if you look at this slide, for 2018, the total revenue, we talk about 30 billion. And then, empirically, we could say that about half of it is spent in the supply chain. 6.5 billion spent in the supply chain. So I guess the question is, what are we as an aid community doing about that? And I think, to accomplish our mission, all NGOs, we perform the same work in supply chain, and we have the same challenge. But we have this tendency to work in silos, not work together. We often respond in the same place, procure the same items, deliver the same kind of aid, but we all do it independently in silo. And this is a huge cost of energy, means, and resources. And the question, if we think about 6.5 billion, how can we change the game in logistics? Yeah, next slide. So just to tell you a little bit about the Réseau Logistique Humanitarian Logistic Network that was created in 2014. It's basically NGO and mostly supply chain director coming together and saying, how can we do things differently? We work in the same place, we have the same challenges. How can we collaborate more? How can we increase our synergies? And we believe that we can cooperate on the ground of logistics, and we can stay independent as well in other ways, So this idea that we are in healthy ways, competing, maybe on some aspect, but in supply chain, we can collaborate, we can work better together, we can unite our logistics while maintaining our specificities. And this is what we have called competition, We collaborate and we compete on some aspect, but definitely we collaborate on the supply chain and we can change the game. And this is also, an expansion of what Dani has expressed on Atlas Logistics, that when we have these common services, when we work together, we can be more effective, we can be more efficient, and we can increase the impact of aid. So this is this idea around this network of NGO coming together to have strength in number. So we have been launching the first cooperative, which is in process right now, which pools logistical resource and connect humanitarian actor by optimizing the cost and the deadline of supply chain to increase the impact of aid. And the creation of this cooperative is built first, on some academic research, some document we have published, in 2019, Strengths in Number, also looking at what the private sector has done successfully when they pooled the logistic resource, and then the air bridge that was also successful as of 2020 with the support of DG ECHO, in complementarity and in cooperation with existing common services, as we talk Atlas, Bioport, the logistic cluster. This is the idea to have an official platform where you can come together and have stronger logistic. So this cooperative, we call it RLH COP. This cooperative, has basically 3 pillars. What does it change? So first, decided to do joint procurement. As we work in the same places and we often buy the same things, how can we do more joint procurement, reducing the logistical burden and cost, but also being more embedded in the local economy, having a local impact where we work. How can we have shared resources? The idea of a marketplace, where you can increase capabilities on skills, network, have specialists in there, where you can optimize your resource. This whole idea of buy and sell between NGO, where you are, between partner in the country where we work, and then the idea to identify new opportunity. You can express your need, and you can benefit from a large pool of experts through this marketplace. And then the third pillar is a shared information system. We know there are too many NGOs right now who don't have a supply chain system, who don't have a digitalized supply chain, and that creates a lot of issues. Just the first one, not being full visibility on your supply chain, not having the data, historical data, and not have eyes on what is going on the ground. And in a time and age where digitalization is at the core, I believe every NGO should be able to have an information system. And if you think about sharing one, the number of data and analysis we can have in one single system could also change the game for joint procurement. So next, to answer this question from the beginning, how can we be more efficient and effective in common services? We came up with this idea from NGO for NGO to create a shared services cooperative with the great support of DG ECHO. It's in process, and it's been created and managed by NGO for the purpose of increasing the impact of aid. So building on what Danny has presented, these common services in country, NGO coming together to change the game, and hopefully, 6.5 million spent in supply chain every year can be spent differently to close the funding gap. Over.
Thanks very much, Cecilia. It's an interesting presentation, and I'm sure there will be some questions on that. Richard, over to you for our third presentation, please.
Yeah, thank you. So from the DG ECHO perspective, logistics is something we've been taking a very close interest in over the last couple of years, working with key partners who've been raising to our attention the savings, the efficiency, and effectiveness possibilities there are. But also on our side, we launched an in-depth evaluation of this, of the different projects that DG ECHO was funding, and how much was being spent on logistics. And then from that, we had a result that was exactly in line with what colleagues here have been mentioning. So the logistics policy was published in February, and it's meant to be an ambitious, strategic policy on how logistics can be done better. And central to this is this element of, if we do things together, we can do things cheaper, but more importantly, better. So this is kind of the I say background, but it's very much in the foreground for us at the moment. And actually, there's a session in 15 minutes. Sorry, not 15 minutes, 2:15, that will look at the logistics policy more in depth, that I'd really encourage you to attend. But then for what we're talking about today, about common services, so this is central to this policy. This was very much something that was high up on our radar. And then in March last year, it was announced that we would be looking at something called the European Humanitarian Response Capacity, the EHRC, because DG ECHO would like to look at where it can fill gaps, operational gaps, to support the response in the field, using the tools that it has at its disposal, including our very extensive field network. So under this EHRC initiative, we're looking at a number of different strands, some of which are being looked at in some other sessions during this forum. But what I'd like to talk to you about a little bit is that we are looking at the possibility of one of these strands being a reinforcement of the EU humanitarian air bridge. So the EU humanitarian air bridge, so far, which has had some notable success, starting with COVID, and then more recently in some other areas like Madagascar. It's been the use of air services put at the disposal of the humanitarian community by DG ECHO, but put so directly, so offering a plane from A to B, but then pooling between the humanitarian partners their items and moving them. So this is the international side. And then here today, we're here to talk about in-country common logistical services, and this fits very nicely with an onward continuation of this international part of the humanitarian air bridge. So when we talk about a reinforced humanitarian air bridge, we're talking about the possibility for DG ECHO to offer onward services. So this is in-country, and ultimately what that means is it could be last-mile delivery, which is something that colleagues here have been talking about, some of the challenges. So addressing these challenges in a way that is efficient, trying to drive the paradigm shift that is foreseen in the logistics policy by encouraging such services, because, as I guess we will discuss, they're not widely used. They are used, and sometimes, well, generally very successfully, as Danny has pointed out, but it's not become a programmatic approach yet. So by DG ECHO taking this opportunity to have this solution under the EHRC, we hope to move forward with some of these possibilities and ultimately open them up to a wider audience and bring them to people's attention by hopefully showing the benefits that these can bring. So I think this is it in a nutshell, but maybe also to stress that the EHRC, the H is for humanitarian, and this is not a civil protection tool. This is humanitarian, using humanitarian funds for humanitarian response. So with that, I think maybe I pass the floor back to Sue. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Richard. And I think there's some really interesting information that's come out of those presentations. So I am going to kick off the discussions with a few questions that we already have come in. The first question it's to Danny and Jerome, but I'm going to come to Danny first. And Danny, given your presentation and all of the statistics, which is great to see stats, why is it that this common services program pricing approach on this large scale has not happened in the past? What are the blockers there? And what would be your opinions as to the way to promote this change in thinking? Still got Danny?
Thanks, Susan. So it's a very tricky question. It's what we've always wondered from our side, why is it not happening, considering all the benefits, of common services? And from what we see, we strongly believe it's really a question of culture, of a humanitarian culture, with this idea of maybe having, Cecile was talking about co-petition, right? Maybe there's this idea of saying that logistics is, especially, we have this culture of delivering aid in emergency, and in this situation, emergency is a key critical lever, actually, to achieve fast aid in a life-saving setting, which means that probably organizations have a culture of internalizing all support functions, to keep all those support functions within themselves in order to be able to deliver aid in an autonomous way as much as they can and as quickly as they can. So I believe there's a strong cultural element of this, and maybe a sort of we are not yet used to outsource in humanitarian aid because of this consideration. But maybe Jérôme, you want to complete on this with concrete examples.
Yeah, I want to say that it was always been seen as reactive support function of operation, but it was never been seen to outsource this, to a strategic driver for aid impact. I think now we need to shift this logistic culture to use logistic as a strategic element of aid. Maybe it's also a question of visibility. Transport operations are usually the first picture of aid delivery that we can see on the field and we can use.
Okay. Thank you. And I think, given the current context that's happening out there at the moment, to either you, Danny or Jérôme, is how could we apply this common services programmatic approach perhaps to the current Ukraine situation?
From what we have assessed, the market was functional before the crisis. The question now is how can the market play its role in terms of delivery of aid in Ukraine? The key barrier is identified now, the lack of knowledge of humanitarian sector on the local logistics sector, and also the lack of knowledge on the local logistics sector on the humanitarian sector. There are major administrative constraints and ethical issues. People doesn't make the difference between war effort and humanitarian aid. That means maybe we have to separate the humanitarian flow from the usual good flow.
Danny, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, well, then building on what Jérôme is saying is that, so we've identified that there are some key constraints in Ukraine, and it's a very dynamic context, and there's a big gap in terms of understanding about what's going on logistic-wise in Ukraine. However, the market is functional. The standards in Ukraine are equivalent to the ones that we have in Europe. So what we believe in this very specific context is that the added value of common services, of a common services approach, it's really about liaising the humanitarian actors with the market actors into bridging these two groups of actors, and address also all the constraints, the humanitarian principle issues, the administrative barriers, and so on. So where we are now actually in Atlas in Ukraine is that we are launching a logistic platform. In the end, not so much to deliver aid with the logic of doing this in the long run, because the market again is able to do that, but really in order to addressing the issues that we identify now, and then with the idea in a couple of months, depending on the evolution of the context, of course, with the idea of pulling out, because the market will be able to do that on our own. So it's here what we believe is more a coordination, a logistic analysis issue, and this is where more than an operational issue in the long run, and this is where we are now in terms of analysis.
Okay, thank you, Danny. And moving on to have a question here for Cecile as well, and following on from that presentation on the cooperative and how we can be better connected and share, I'd like to ask Cecile, what role should donors be playing in this approach to the programmatic side and having these communal or common services approach? We still got Cecile?
Yes, I'm here. But thank you, Suzanne. I'll respond in a minute. Just a short comment to build on what Danny has said. So I've been in Moldova for 3 weeks now, and it's interesting because partners arrive at different time, and everybody starts responding at different moments. And then we don't have visibility, on what are the type of response and the logistic response the partner are doing. So of course there are working group now starting to be put in place and etc. But what we really mean and need is this coordination mechanism between the partner and the platform to be able to coordinate, what are the needs and what are the common response we can do together. It's still very based on who do you know, who is in town, and who was here first. So yes, there is something really to do here about having a mechanism and a platform to respond together. So moving to what the donor can do differently, I think there is something specific to the presentation I did about this cooperative, how can we have, approve and validate, a donor approving and validate the common services like the RLH COP or other relevant actors? How can we be partner in that, How can we work together in that when you have such project rising from NGO? But I think there is also something critical is how can we do savings, healthy savings, when we spend our grant, And of course, it's a sensitive topic, but we know that sometimes if NGO don't spend the full grant, they may lose their overhead costs, right? But how can we allow this flexibility in the grant to have these savings in the supply chain? And then to use this money that is saved for a greater impact. How can we work together better to have this flexibility in the grant? And then I think the third thing, which ECHO has been doing very well, it's about having logistic policy and putting logistics, at the heart of discussion around how do we deliver project on time, how do we deliver project in budget, and how do we work better together in logistics while also reducing our impact on the environment and all of that. So this also goes through having logistic policy done by our donors.
Thanks so much. And I have just another question following on from something you'd said on the siloed approach. And maybe give us some of your personal thoughts on how we can break that siloed approach. The cooperative you have there with the RLH is a great initiative. How do we bring some of the bigger agencies into that and widen that approach out?
Yeah, absolutely. How? I think already for us as this RLH to come together and create a cooperative, we have been through all the possible bumps on the road to be able even to work together and write the bylaws and have this cooperative in a model, that works. So we have been through this ourselves, through this difficult time of working together. And I believe because we have done it, because we are there, it's possible to expand now to the whole sector of working together. But as I said, it starts with having a platform that everybody can use, having common mechanism, having funding, and having a common approach around that. So the idea here is to start small and scale up, and demonstrate this can work with 9 NGO now, and scale up the services to the whole sector. But it's also about having people on the ground, who understand the market, who understand the local economy, who have supplier on the ground, and all the preparedness work is done. So when an NGO needs something and need to go in common procurement, for example, all the hard work of sourcing the supplier, having the long-term agreement is in place. And not everyone has to do it separately. We can work as a team and work and use, the work that was done on preparedness as well. Lovely.
Thank you very much, Cecile. And I would like to just come back to Richard and just have a couple of questions here on the EHRC. And a question we've had asked is a feeling that perhaps with this new approach that DG ECHO then becomes very much hands-on instead of its much more traditional role. And potentially how does that duplicate, or does it in fact duplicate with the role of the logistics cluster? Richard.
Thank you for the question. First of all, just to complement what Cecile was saying about the way that donors can help with this, actually in the DG ECHO logistics policy, we highlight this very clearly, that DG ECHO has a role in doing advocacy towards other donors who are also doing some excellent things in the area, but to actually make this more of a common approach. So this is something we'll certainly be looking at. And then on the question of ECHO, the hands-on role that has been highlighted under the European Humanitarian Response Capacity, ECHO does have its extensive field network, which we're very proud of, which allows us to have excellent information on what needs are and so on. But of course, we're very conscious not to duplicate, and we don't want to get into areas where it's not helpful and it's not adding value. So maybe I can clarify a little bit more on what we were thinking of adding under the EHRC to support in-country common logistical services. So DG ECHO already has a very agile transport broker contract that basically allows us to procure transport services for a variety of different scenarios around the world very quickly. And we already use this for the humanitarian air bridge. There's the possibility there to do warehousing. And then for in-country common services, there might be some opportunities to move items around for partners if it's helpful. But then a very large part of our thinking is that we might have a standby contract with a partner that has excellent experience in the area, is able to deploy globally, to quickly offer these kind of strategic in-country common logistical services, because I think this is something that could be interesting, and in that way, not trying to claim to have expertise or go too far beyond what our area of expertise is. And this links up with your question on the log cluster as well, and the global logistics cluster's operational services that are offered as a last resort in certain circumstances, usually when the situation is really quite a difficult one. I mean, it's with DG ECHO's expertise behind it and field network and so on, it allows us to complement the work of the log cluster by maybe going to places and offering these kinds of services where the global logistics cluster would not be deployed. So this is a bit the thinking behind it, that it's more of a flexible tool, agile, quick, that the decision-making process is quick because it's a tool where DG ECHO will, together with the partner, take a fast decision on where this solution is going to be deployed. Because with the log cluster, I mean, it can take a couple of weeks sometimes for many good reasons, because it's a broader tool and a bit more of a consensus, as I understand it. So I think in this way, we really hope to make sure that the tool is complementary. And of course, we're very open to ongoing dialogue on that to understand as we go forward what stakeholders' key thoughts on that are.
And following on very nicely from that, we have a question from our online people in that, how will you coordinate with GLC and OCHA on this system?
I guess the quick answer is as much as possible. That if we're talking now about the solution with a partner, that partner would be one that has demonstrated very clearly that they are fully integrated with the response. And of course, in the logistics policy, we highlight that the planning has to be from the very beginning on logistics. It has to be integrated, it has to be strategic. So all of that linking up, it shouldn't be happening when the emergency happens, it should be beforehand. So I think that is how we would
thank you.
Proceed.
And I think we just have a little bit more time. There are two more questions, actually, probably back to Cecile on the RLASH. From the Zoom calls, Cecile, I have a question that says, has the RLASH cooperative a vocation to add new members? And if you do they have to be an ECHO partner?
Very good question, thank you. So we are now defining all the mechanism to enter, but for sure the aim is to be as large as possible to really support humanitarian and development actors as a whole. And this is a question now, we aim to support everyone, and of course ECHO has been a critical partner for us in this project, and we have to define the way forward together. But as a whole, we aim to support the whole humanitarian sector.
Okay, thank you very much. And then it is sticking with you, Cecile, I'm afraid, on the RLASH. Our next question from the online is, what are the next steps for the RLASH, both short-term and long-term ambitions?
Yeah, so the RLASH cooperative on this platform, as I said, we have been officially registered as a cooperative. Now we are building, the IT system to be able to start operating as of next year. And we will for sure make sure we communicate well on what are the entry mechanism and how everyone can use the platform and how we can, as a logistic team, work together on this on the future of this cooperative together.
Thanks so much, Cecile. And I think just looking at the time, we are at time now for this session. So I'd just like to close up and say thank you to our panel, Cecile, Jérôme, and Danny and Richard, for answering the questions. I hope all of you here in the auditorium and online have found this useful. And of course, as Richard said, there are follow-up sessions for the other strands from the policy that I think you'll find equally as interesting. Thank you very much.
Thanks.